Okay, imagine this for a second. Your community is finally thriving. You've just won this huge lawsuit against the government, your local economy is actually doing great, and you have a real safety net for everyone. Things are looking up. And then, because of all that success, the government decides to erase you. It sounds totally unbelievable, right? Well, it's exactly what happened. Let's get into this story.
So, this is the big, baffling question at the heart of all this. I mean, how does that even make sense? How does winning trigger a total catastrophe? Well, to understand it, we've got to look at one specific nation and a really radical, kind of scary shift in US policy. This one sentence, right here, just perfectly captures the cruel irony of this whole thing. For the Menominee people, their success, their self sufficiency, that wasn't seen as a strength the US government should support. No, it was seen as an excuse for the government to just walk away from all its responsibilities. So let's set the scene a little bit. The year is 1952. And for the Menominee Nation of Wisconsin, honestly, they had every reason to be optimistic about what was coming next. I mean, think about it. After this grueling 16-year legal battle, they had just won a massive settlement from the government for mismanaging their forests. They were running their own profitable lumber mill, and while people weren't necessarily, individually rich, the nation itself had this strong safety net. But to the policymakers way out in Washington, D.C., this didn't look like a success story. It looked like a nation that was ready to be cut loose. But what happened to the Menominee? It wasn't just some isolated event. It was actually part of a much bigger national policy shift. See, over the years, U.S. policy towards Native nations has swung like a giant pendulum, back and forth between sort of grudgingly supporting their existence and then actively trying to wipe them out. And in the 1950s, believe me, that pendulum was swinging hard towards erasure. And at its core, this was really about money. After World War II, the US government was looking to cut costs absolutely everywhere, and they zeroed in on the Bureau of Indian Affairs. That's the agency that funds basic services on reservations. Services, by the way, that the government had agreed to provide forever in 19th century treaties, usually in exchange for enormous amounts of land. But now, officials started wondering, what if forever wasn't actually forever?
So, to make this happen, the government came up with this kind of two-pronged approach. First up was relocation. This was all about encouraging individuals to leave their home reservations for big cities, promising them jobs and housing. The goal? Well, the hope was that they would just, blend in and disappear as a distinct culture. But the second and way more devastating policy was termination. And this wasn't about individuals. This was about ending the very existence of a tribe as a political entity. And this right here gets to the heart of what was truly at stake: sovereignty, the right of a people to govern themselves. Termination meant the U.S. government would just stop recognizing a tribe's government. It would dissolve their reservation lands, and it would cut off every bit of federal support that was promised in those treaties. The logic was kind of chillingly simple. If there are no more Native nations, well, then we have no more responsibility to them. Okay, so armed with this new policy, the government went looking for a test case. And who did they land on? You guessed it, the successful, the seemingly self-sufficient Menominee Nation. And this is how it all went down. It was a total bait and switch. A senator from Utah comes to visit the tribe, and he presents them with a vote. And the vote seems simple. Do you want the $8.5 million you're owed? Of course they did. By a show of hands, most people voted yes. But what so many didn't realize was that the senator had attached a hidden provision to that vote, a tiny little detail that authorized the complete termination of their nation. By the time they understood the trap, it was just too late. The fallout was immediate, and it was catastrophic. The reservation was just turned into a new county, which instantly became the poorest county in the entire state of Wisconsin. Without federal money, their only hospital had to shut its doors. The profitable lumber mill, it was taken over by a new superintendent who promptly fired 150 Menominee workers. The whole tribal corporation was on the edge of bankruptcy within just 7 years. It was a complete and total disaster, and it forced so many people to sell off their own land just to get by. And the story didn't end with the Menominee. They were just one of the first. In total, the U.S. government terminated 109 Native nations during this time. Think about what that means for the land. This single policy stripped federal protections from over 1.3 million acres of native land, basically just opening it all up for sale. And most importantly, the human cost.
More than 11,000 people were cut off from their tribal governments, from their communities, and from their very identities as citizens of their own sovereign nations. But this is not just a story of destruction. It is absolutely also a story of incredible, unbelievable resilience. Because the Menominee people, they were not done fighting, not by a long shot. It took nearly 20 years. In 1970, this grassroots activist group called Drums organized to do something that literally nobody had ever done before: reverse a termination. Led by the amazing Ada Deer, they lobbied, they protested, they fought for years and years. And then, in 1973, they won. Congress passed an act that restored the Menominee tribe of Wisconsin. Ada Deer's words here are just so powerful. We invented a new policy. Restoration wasn't an option. It wasn't on the table. It literally didn't exist until they, through sheer will and determination, made it exist. It just goes to show you don't always have to accept the policies that are handed down to you. You can fight to change them. And her own story is just a perfect testament to that. Ada Deer went on to become the first woman to lead the restored Menominee Nation. And later, and you've got to love the irony here, she became the first Native American woman to lead the very agency, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, that had overseen the whole disastrous termination policy in the first place. So the Menominee victory was absolutely historic, but it didn't just magically erase the scars of that era or end the fight for other nations. You know, the legacy of this whole period it's really mixed. While some other terminated nations, like the Klamath tribe, they also fought for and won restoration, they never got all their land back. And sadly, many other tribes that were terminated back in the 50s and 60s are still without federal recognition to this day, still fighting for what was taken from them. When you boil it all down, the policies of relocation and termination, they were just new moves from a very old playbook. They were designed to solve the government's so-called Indian problem by making indigenous people disappear, both culturally and politically, and, of course, to get out of promises the government had made. The policies failed in that ultimate goal, but wow, the damage they caused was immense, and it is still being felt today. This story of the Menominee proves that a policy of erasure doesn't have to be the final word, but it also raises this really critical question that still echoes today. For the dozens of nations still living with the consequences of termination, still fighting for their sovereignty, what's it going to take to finally restore what was lost?